Coming up on today's Locked On Bucks, we continue to take a look back at the offseason for the Bucks and how that stacks up against other teams as one prominent NBA podcaster has weighed in and a rare instance of Bucks fans actually wanting to hear what the national media had to say. So we'll get into where the Bucks stand this upcoming season and put a bow on Summer League next on Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Bucks. I am Justin Garcia, joined as always by Camille Davis, and we thank you for making Locked On Bucks your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts. You can find us on YouTube as well, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's Locked On Bucks is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. The playoffs have wound down and the sports stop sporting like we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. Something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Camille, I mentioned at the top, we had a rather prominent NBA podcaster share his thoughts on the offseason, and I will say this. So, spoiler alert, let's pull off the Band-Aid. Bill Simmons on the most recent Bill Simmons podcast, talking about some moves made in the Eastern Conference and the Bucks specifically. We'll get to what he had to say exactly in a second here. But I had this conversation with a very loyal Locked On listener, shouts to Ron, somewhat recently about, I think it came up of how I wonder how national media is going to view this move or that move. Mm-hmm. And I suppose we should preface with this, like, who cares, right? Like, it's a group of people that watch a handful of parts of the Bucks games. So take the opinion with a grain of salt. But in this conversation, I remember pointing out, Bill Simmons through it all was the one guy, and maybe it was just the relationship with Doc Rivers, but he was the one guy that was oddly still, as much as you could be with everything unfolding, pro Bucks last year. They still got Giannis and Dame. I still think the Celtics are a better team and they're going to win, but I'm a little concerned with that. And he amplified it on the most recent show, saying, look, I would put the Bucks ahead of the Knicks. I would put the Bucks ahead of the Sixers, not ahead of the Celtics, which, look, they won the title. You can't fault him there. But that's the team that I am most concerned with. The Cavs had a coaching change. The Pacers burst onto the scene last year. The Knicks lost Isaiah Hartenstein, but they added Mikal Bridges. And, of course, the 76ers are still spending. It's the Bucks that just rounded out their roster with 3 veteran minimums and 2 rookies that probably aren't going to play or be a significant part of the rotation. That's the team I am most worried about. And the logic was simply, it was a year from hell last year. So we documented that year ad nauseum throughout the course of the season. But I ask you, is that where you also stand?
Yeah. When I was thinking about just the Eastern Conference and like the tiers of it, so I put the Celtics in their own tier just so far through this offseason. The Celtics are in a tier in their own, which they deserve, returning champions, defending champions, so on and so forth. You're seeing teams around the league trying to load up in ways to combat what the Celtics do with a whole bunch of wing defenders. So yes, the Celtics tier of their own, but like right underneath that, I had Milwaukee, Philly, and the Knicks in the same kind of tier there of like that the next group. And of those 3, I still have the most faith in Milwaukee. And maybe that's because I've watched this team so much. But I do have faith if they are healthy, that they are really hard out. And that's just the part with it when it comes to the Bucks is the health aspects of it. Even Bill Simmons mentioned, like, the last time we saw a healthy Giannis was 2022. And there was no Chris Middleton at that time. And yet and still, the Bucks took the Celtics to 7 games, and it would have been over had Jason Tatum not had a completely ridiculous game 6 in Milwaukee, which at that point when we lost that game 6, I was just like, that was the Bucks' chance. Like they were going to do this, they had to close it out at home. So like a good point to keep in mind, like the last time you saw Giannis healthy was still without Chris Middleton by his side. Like we have not seen the Bucks big 3 even just going back when it was still Drew Holiday and included with that, fully healthy since that championship run. So again, if they're healthy, like I love the combination. I love the idea of how this whole thing fits with the big three. And I can see him having some like Doc, because that's his guy. Like, I can definitely see him having a lot more faith in him because of who is running the Bucks. But even if you take that out of it and just talent alone, like the top of this team, if they're healthy, they're going to be a hard out.
And yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Is the last time somebody beat a healthy Giannis in the playoffs was that 2022 series. Jason Tatum in Game 6 and Al Horford. I don't think we can sleep on what he did in that game. And again, when they've had their big three, I'm not going to classify Eric Bledsoe as part of that, but when they've had a big three healthy, they haven't lost in the playoffs. The last time Giannis and Chris together lost in the playoffs was in the bubble to the Miami Heat. But again, that was a series where Giannis missed 2 games, a game and a half. So there's the caveat to add there of not totally healthy. I think it's perfectly fair to put the Knicks and the 76ers in the same group, as you kind of mentioned, as the Bucks, and say, look, these teams, the 76ers definitely got better. We think the Knicks got better, even though it's still an unknown to me of how do you replace Hartenstein, and when you get Julius Randle back, what does that change? Because the Knicks really started to take off last year during the injury, where it's not quite as much bogging down of the offense from Julius Randle. So there's those questions, but I think it's fair to put all 3 of those teams in that same grouping in the Eastern Conference. And look, I know the Pacers beat the Bucks last year and beat the Knicks. I still don't think the Pacers are in that group. Maybe they continue to make some growth here and are knocking on the door of that tier. But I still think it's set up with basically 3 tiers to be interested in the Eastern Conference. The Celtics are up there, the Knicks, the Sixers, and the Bucks in that second tier. And then in the one just below that, you would put teams like the Pacers, like the Cavaliers, like the Orlando Magic too. Okay, these teams are interesting. And, right there, we're talking about 7 at the very least competitive, think we're going to win a first round series teams in the Eastern Conference. And that is something we have not seen in quite some time.
Yeah, it's been building up. Like every year, it's like the East is getting a little bit better, a little bit better. And even last year when we were talking about just the Bucks' chances, especially now during that last stretch when they just so happened to lose some games down the stretch where you were very surprised they were losing these games and what that was doing for the standings at the time, just given what was going on with Cleveland, with Orlando, and how far might the Bucks fall. So again, it's going to be a season where you got to take care of business because the losses, they will add up. And there are a lot of teams that are looking to compete. They're looking to be competitive. You already mentioned Orlando and the Pacers and the Cavs and that next tier below the Bucks, which I would agree with for sure. And you can't take them lightly on any night. But for the Bucks, I mean, really, it's going to come down to Chris, Giannis, and Dame. Like those 3 are healthy and good to go. And if Doc can utilize them in ways to best get the most out of their talent, then that's going to be the biggest boom for the Bucks, because we talked a bit about the Dame and the Giannis pairing and how it felt a little bit like your term, my term. And if Doc can really find ways to integrate them so it's more synergy between the two and they're able to get other people looks, which we saw them able to do last year. Like if we can make that even better, just cleaner, where guys don't have to think about whose turn is it and they can just really play ball off of each other. Like I really do like the prospects for the Bucks.
Yeah, it's a much different feeling. Last year there was that, holy cow, like last year there's a couple of different feelings throughout the course of the offseason, and it's a little different as we start to head to the end of the offseason. We're a couple of weeks away from knowing what the schedule is going to be next year. So we will we'll break down what those differences are. And I mentioned, look, there's 7 teams that right off the bat think we are going to or should win a first round series at least in the playoffs in the Eastern Conference. We'll take a deeper look at that as well coming up after the break here on Locked On Bucks. Passion, drive, and patience. That is the formula for winning championships and also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. So taking a look last year, Camille, again, Celtics had the best record in the East a year ago. This isn't the over-unders episode, but we'll get into that as we get closer to the end of the offseason. But their over-under was set at what I think it was like 58.5, which, look, I get it. They're the reigning champions. They didn't lose anyone. I can't remember the last time we had the defending champion bring back the whole team, basically. But again, just as we said, hey, are people sleeping on the Bucks in the East to start the show? Are people sleeping on the fact that Kristaps Porzingis is going to miss half the season from the sounds of it? So that, again, at some point, Al Horford is going to look like a player that is close to 40. So those are pretty big question marks, I think, surrounding the Celtics coming into this season. And then you have those other teams we mentioned. Knicks, who finished second last year. Bucks finished third. And the 76ers were in the play-in tournament. They figure to be a top 4 team in the East. To me, the question all of a sudden becomes this. When we mention those 7 teams that you feel pretty good about, unless they suffer the year from hell like the Bucks face, we think we know they're going to be top 7 teams, and they expect to advance in the playoffs. When you look at teams that were in the play-in tournament last year, so one of the teams we did not name was the Miami Heat, and I have long given up trying to project and guess what goes on with Miami. When you think they're done, they come back and reach the finals and as an 8 seed. When you say, okay, we got to keep that in mind and give them a little bit of respect, then they just revert back to a play-in tournament team. So I don't know what to make of the Heat. They did not really make any moves of substance outside of their draft picks this summer. The Bulls were a play-in tournament team a year ago. I think that ship has sailed, and they've started to wave the white flag. I'd be curious to see if they can find a new home for Zach LaVine. You have the Atlanta Hawks, who are in a pretty similar spot. I think they're trying to do that awkward thing of let's not fully tank, but let's try to just be okay and get as many assets as we can in the process. Their best case scenario is likely that 9-10 spot. Once again, teams that didn't make that tournament, the Brooklyn Nets, I'm going to go out and call this right now. They will not be a top 10 team
Safe bet.
in the Eastern Conference. The Hornets, Wizards, and Pistons all made moves in the offseason. I'm very curious to see the growth from someone like Brandon Miller, and could the Hornets actually knock on the door of, man, that team might be that 10 seed for the play-in tournament. They're 15 games out of that mix a year ago. But, as we went through all those changes for other teams, 36 and 46 was the 10 seed in the East last year. And you also have to factor in when we mention, we think the Bucks are better. We know the Sixers are better. The Knicks at the very least are just as good. We think the Pacers might be better. The Magic could be better. There's going to be more wins, which means there's going to be more losses for those lower tiered teams in the Eastern Conference. So could 34, 35 wins get you that 10 seed? So I don't think you can cross off the Hornets. Raptors, maybe similar as well there, but Wizards, 15 wins a year ago. The Pistons, 14. Yeah, Detroit, they're going to be better because of the moves that they made. I don't think they're going to be pushing for the 10 seed. And same story for the Wizards. So as we go through it, I think just your first glance says, well, maybe the Bulls are out of the mix if they make another move. So there may be space for one team to jump into that mix. But to me, the interesting part is the jockeying in the Eastern Conference, because, for the longest time last year, we spent time talking about you can't finish fourth. That means you're getting the Celtics in the second round. Well, as we've learned 2 years in a row, I would love nothing more than to get to the second round of the playoffs. I just don't know that there is this path anymore of ideally this is going to be the seed. I know years ago we took a look at where do most of the finals teams come from seeding wise. I think the 2 seed is the one that has produced the most finals appearances since 2000, but I don't think that even matters anymore. And as we've learned, it's not just the East getting better, it's what you mentioned in the first segment too. Look, they haven't been healthy in the playoffs since they won the championship. So if you don't have that, you're not going to go far. It may be 3 straight years of a first round exit.
It could be. In addition to that, it's about who you match up with as well, where it's like certain teams are going to be able to exploit what other teams do in different ways. So this past season, getting the Pacers in the first round, we were like, this team poses a big matchup problem for the Bucks because they excel in all the areas where we have seen the Bucks struggle historically throughout last season, which is teams that really run with the pace, transition defense, getting back. And the Pacers were a team that loved to take advantage of that. So in addition to like jockeying for seeding, it's going to come down a lot to like, well, who are you matched up with in this first round? Because as you mentioned with Miami, if it's Miami, it's like, okay, we kind of know how Miami plays. They haven't made that many changes so far. Like you can figure that out. If you have the Pacers again, one, I'm sure the Bucks will love the get back of like, we feel like we're better equipped this year. Let's get to it and go forward from there. So then the next question that I have is, in addition to matchups, is like, well, did the Bucks change in any way considerably to help them in various matchup situations? Like, have they gotten better on paper? This is all on paper. We won't know until we actually see them take the court. So forgive me if my answer changes in a couple of months when I actually see it. But like on paper, theoretically, the changes that the Bucks did make, only having minimum contracts, you swap out Beasley for Gary Trent Jr., which for a lot of people I've been seeing is like, it's a 1-to-1 match, but you would say that Trent's just an upgraded version of what Beasley can do. And I can agree with that. The defense is a bit better. You get the same shooting for the most part, a bit more shot creation, but a lot of the same ideas of what Malik Beasley gives you, you get with Gary Trent Jr. I can subscribe to that. You have Taurean Prince coming in. And as we've mentioned, we've heard Laker fans kind of complain about Prince, but from my understanding, it was more so just about how many minutes he was getting. If you can keep him in that 20-minute range, somewhere around there, you should be good. And he would theoretically play that Jay Crowder small ball 4, that forward small backup 3 for the Bucks. And ideally, like we had Jay Crowder to do that. It just didn't, in execution, it didn't work out. So if this works out in execution with Prince, you already have a bit more versatility defensively than what you can throw out than what you had last year. Then, of course, you have Wright coming off the bench, which, again, that's defense coming off the bench that the Bucks did not have last year. So the Bucks were only able to make a few tweaks around the main roster. Getting Gary Trent Jr. is a big one, given the fact that we didn't think he'd go for a minimum. But like on paper, what the Bucks have done, I think make them a bit more versatile and what they can throw out there, which I think should stand up in some different matchups a bit better than what it did last year. Again, if the top 3 guys aren't healthy on the Bucks, it's a moot point. For the most part, because you need Giannis, you need Damian, you need Chris to really kind of drive you going forward. But I like how the Bucks on paper look to match up with a lot of these different teams in the East.
And that to me is the biggest part is just get better, right? Yeah. I think that's kind of the point that we were at last year in the playoffs when you looked at some of the rotations and lineups that, it's not even the fault of Doc Rivers or any coach for that matter. It was basically, this is what you've left me to work with. Now, we've had the conversation of should Andre Jackson have played more? Should you have played MarJon more? Sure. But looking at what you had in terms of vets in the playoffs, when you look at that roster and you think Pat Beverly was playing a heavy dose of minutes. Number one, he had earned it, right? But also by necessity with the injuries that piled up and just the defense. It was, we need somebody that can defend. Pat Beverly does it. Okay. I guess by way of that, you're getting a ton of minutes. So you had him in the mix. You had Jay Crowder as an option. Didn't get heavy minutes. When you did see those minutes, it frankly was a disappointment. But that was really the only option you had for that position you described before of who's going to take on some of those wing assignments, who can kind of flip between a 3 and a 4 and take on those switches. Jay Crowder and Danilo Gallinari were your only options to bring off the bench. there. You had to lean on AJ Green for a lot more shooting that he was bringing to the position. And of course, the Malik Beasley saga has been well documented. So just on paper, they are much better, right? It doesn't mean that they're going to be one of the best defenses in the league, but from where they were last year, and especially from where that group was at its lowest point, when it was the 23rd ranked defense in the league, they made some strides, and we can point to, well, it came at the expense of the offense. Sure, that's what this summer has been for, right? To get through training camp and to work together as a team and to say, okay, I feel like we kind of know what to expect from each other. Doc Rivers has talked about that in all of his appearances too, of, I got to learn these guys. And I feel like we took that knowledge into this offseason of here's how we got to do things and here's how we're going to work together and come together on these things. So I think that's a massive advantage for this team. And I just keep going back to, look, if you can finish 12th defensively, somewhere around there, be in, ideally not 15, 14, but just be in the top half defensively. All of these pieces, I think, help you get there. Certainly, DeLon Wright is the biggest of those pieces. Taurean Prince, as you mentioned, his ability to take on that Jay Crowder role at a younger age and at this point in his career at a much better rate, that is going to help you get there. And even Gary Trent Jr. has shown to be a better defender than Malik Beasley throughout his career. Maybe that's not a high bar, but he's shown it. And even that year with Nick Nurse in Toronto, he showed to the ability to go beyond that. So I'm curious to see, hey, what untapped potential, well, we saw it tapped once before, but what's out there that you could actually get from him? So on that level, I do think they're better. And I do think that puts you in a position to say, we can have a top 13, 12, somewhere like that defense with these changes, with this athleticism that we've added. And more importantly, which we'll get to in our final segment here, with some of these young guys that we're going to lean on, that we trust a little bit more, that are more seasoned and understand the system and what we want to run. We had a chance to put them through camp and work with them in the offseason, and we feel like that is going to be a massive upgrade for us as well. All of that, though, it only works if the offense works. And as you mentioned, it was kind of your turn, my turn at times last year. We started to see it take off, then it kind of regressed. I still don't know what to really take away from the second half of last year, if for no other reasons than the injuries that this team faced.
Yeah, it was all over the place, where for the most part throughout the first half of the season with Adrian Griffin, the Bucks had pretty good health. It's like when Doc came in, things just started going awry at that point. With the big three only playing, what was it, 7 or 8 games together as an entirety under Doc, where it's like, it's just difficult to really figure out how all these pieces are going to fit, especially when you're coming in mid-season. I know some look at that as an excuse, but like, that is the reality of the situation that Doc Rivers walked into, that the Bucks were in as well. So it was a lot of trying to figure things out just on the fly. You don't have much time to practice. You're doing things during games. When you do get time to practice, Doc's really trying to install just what he considers, it sounded like basic principles of how he wants his team to play basketball. So you weren't able to really add on top of that. So that's why coming into this year, we kept saying, like, this is really like the first year of Doc. This is really like the first year to see what his team is going to look like with all of his guys around him, with his coaching staff, with him able to implement things the way that he wants to, with him being able to get a full summer of seeing these young guys who theoretically, before we saw all these signings, we're thinking like they're going to play a big part. And I do think even though the Bucks added 3 vets through free agency, like these young guys are still going to have opportunities to contribute next year or this upcoming season. It's just a question of which of those guys do we think is going to be for the most part throughout next season.
Yeah, and it ties into the young players, which we can't leave without mentioning what we saw from that group in Summer League. So now that the Summer League is wrapped up, an 0-5 record for the Bucks, there were some takeaways, good and bad. We will get to those coming up next year on Locked On Bucks. Well, it is hit that point on the calendar where everything is starting to wind down in the sports world before it picks back up again in earnest in just a few weeks here. But the playoffs have wound down. We're getting fewer games, and the sports just aren't sporting like we want them to. However, FanDuel lets you keep the sports going whenever you want. All you have to do is open up the app and dream up bets anytime you're in the mood. This summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a booster bonus daily. That's right, something for everyone, every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. And if you're watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day, but have to turn down the volume with all the shouting, it means it's time to make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day, bringing you the biggest stories without all of the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, news, and it streams 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. 0-5 record for Summer League, Camille, was certainly not ideal for the Bucks as we spent some time before it began saying, hey, they got a lot of guys who are interested in watching this season. And I think that remained throughout those 5 games, but it just became much more difficult to watch as Summer League progressed. So in the spirit of what stood out, good and bad, I think we're aligned here. There are 2 players to me that really stood out for the good. I think one more so than the other. And we'll get to the bad in a second. But those 2 to spotlight are clearly first-round draft pick A.J. Johnson, who, the stats weren't terrific, but it's Summer League. It was more the flashes and the signs of, okay, I think there's something here that we saw from him. The speed, the burst, the quickness, his ability to finish in traffic, too. All the other stuff persists. Like you're going to still need some seasoning. He's still very raw. You're probably going to have to put some bulk on the frame as well. But I think, we talked about this after, I think it was the 3rd game of the preseason. He did go scoreless in the final game too. But there was one of those games, I think it was game 3, where it felt like, well, I feel like there's going to be a lot of people deleting A.J. Johnson tweets now. And I think that was kind of the consensus of you left Summer League saying, okay, I can kind of see what you were looking at. Not to say it changes things that he's going to be a contributor this year and he's the new backup for Dame. But I think if you were on the fence or negative, you were at least nudged upward in your overall view of A.J. Johnson in those 5 Summer League games.
Yeah, if you were wondering what the Bucks saw in a guy who didn't play much in the NBL, like why is he being selected? Like Summer League showed those flashes, as you mentioned, the speed, the ability to finish, and he's playing a lot of point guard as well, which, as we know, was a very difficult position for a young player to come in and play. He's been seen as a combo guard, so he's played some point guard for sure, some 2 guard, but coming in and organizing a Summer League team, it's a different type of challenge for a young guard. So the flashes is what I was looking for with AJ, and I definitely saw those. I think it was game 3 where he had 22, and it was just like, wow, like I can see if this all comes together, how this could be. Definitely needs to add some more strength to his frame. I think that'll help with the finishing aspect as well. And he already has some really good touch around the rim that we've seen in flashes, but that's what I expected from the rookies, where it's like, just show me some flashes. I don't need it to be consistent. Just show me some flashes. And that's what we got. And we also saw the inconsistency, right? Finishing Summer League, going over. That's always tough to see. But again, a 19-year-old, I expected for there to be some inconsistency along the way, and we got that. But the flashes gave you something to kind of build on. Like, okay, I can see why the Bucks would take this chance on this guy at this point in the draft and hope that he can develop into something. Because if it does come together, it could be really fun to watch. I forget which broadcast this was where Jamal Crawford was on the call, but he was like, this kid reminds me of me a lot. When I watch him, he's like, how I came into the league with my frame, just needing to get stronger. But like, I see a lot of myself in his game, and I'm like, that's not bad to hear somebody like Confrence say. Yeah, it's good to hear. So like, yeah, definitely have some good feelings about Johnson coming out of the Summer League. And then your guy, Chris Livingston, who did a lot that wasn't necessarily flashy. And then you look at the stats and you're like, he had a really solid game. He just did a lot of everything, a lot of like the garbage work for the Bucks. There were even times, I think it was game 2, when they ran him out there as the 5. And I was like, this is really interesting. They're just really trying to see what he can do. 5 might be a little over his head there, but it does seem as if he can at least play up a little bit to the 4 every so often. Like just trying to see where he fits in. The rebounding was there. The shot was pretty consistent as well. You give him an open catch and shoot, and it was looking pretty decent for Chris Livingston. In addition to him making just the right decisions, he just seems like somebody who has come along a lot so far this summer. And I can see why he was somebody who, when Horst and Doc Rivers were talking about the young guys on this team, were like, he had a really good summer, and we're excited about what he can do for us this upcoming year.
He averaged 15 and 9 basically in summer league, shot around 55% from the floor and above 40% on threes. Now it was just 14 3-point attempts. But you mentioned what Doc and John Horst had to say about him and the work that he's been putting in. And they think that he's somebody that's going to contribute. We spent quite a bit of time on this show talking about Chris Livingston. When I say we, I mean me throughout the course of this summer. But I mean, I was drawn to him by, number one, I was long a proponent of, man, just draft guys from Kentucky. And now it's like, draft guys from UConn, draft guys that are going through these programs that develop you for the NBA. And we see churn out NBA level talent. It's like in football, draft people from LSU, draft people from Alabama. So like, do the same. So that was one check mark of, and I know it was towards the tail end of the Coach Cal run, but still like, okay, we got a Kentucky guy. And then you start to read some of the intangibles and look into his 1 year that he spent at Kentucky, 6'6", with a 6'11" wingspan. Started all 34 games. His 1 year at Kentucky was an all SEC all freshman team selection. And, you know, the write-ups on everybody, Sam Vecini, anybody that digs into the draft profiles, was basically, you know, I think his ceiling is probably a contributor, a bench player that is out there as a pretty big defensive piece for you. And the RotoWire write-up, his draft stock went way up throughout the process, got an invite to the NBA Combine, which at one point wasn't on the table for him. Mentioned the wingspan and his bulk at 222 pounds. Reliable pick-and-roll defender for Kentucky, limited opponents to 37% shooting as the primary defender. His build aligns with the modern NBA. I think that right there is the big thing we kept going back to, is when you see him in the gym, you say, this is the type of guy that we need. This is everything we asked for, of a big that can hold up on some of those switches, has the athleticism to switch on the perimeter, but can hold up with some of those bigs. And that was the write-up on Chris Livingston coming out of college. Physicality makes him capable of guarding, slashing, jumbo wings, and athletic forwards. His offensive game is much less projectable, but I mean, look, you don't want to get into the spot where you're playing a number of one-way guys. I think that was really the challenge with, as we've gone over quite a bit, Malik Beasley starting next to Damian Lillard. But if you can sprinkle them in, and again, as high as I am on Chris Livingston, we don't anticipate him to be a starter in the league. If he does get to that level, great. You've really found something. Yeah. But it's that 10 to 15 minute stretch of when we have him, our defense. And that's what made the Bucks bench so good. Those first few years under Bud, you didn't have a pure scorer coming off the bench, but it was a bench that played good defense, good team defense, where you knew we're going to give you a lead. Don't give it up. And for the most part, they didn't. Guys like Chris Livingston in a bench role can help you do that.
He definitely can. He definitely can. And I hate to end the episode, Justin, on a down note. And I won't even belabor the point much, because I think you and Frank discussed MarJon in depth last week. But that's the other side of this. It's the as you have on the side here, the stock down for MarJon Beauchamp. And he was somebody, when the Bucks drafted him, I was really excited about the prospects of what he could bring to the team. We just haven't seen it come together yet. And in Summer League, what I was just hoping for MarJon was just look like you're the best player on the floor. For the Milwaukee Bucks, you're the vet on this team, so to speak, like come in and show that. And outside of the third quarter and the first game, it wasn't something that was seen consistently from MarJon. So I feel like for Summer League, it just wasn't a good showing for him. I believe he averaged a little bit over 12 points on like 12 shots throughout the Summer League. And we always know Summer League stats can be wonky, like weird things can happen. And just because you have a bad Summer League does not mean you're going to be a bad player. But with Marjon entering to his third year, I was definitely hoping to see more from him. And what we were able to get was just a little bit disappointing from Marjon. As someone in the Marjon like Stan tribe, I was just like, this is not going to help his case, especially with what you saw with Chris Livingston, what you saw from Ajax before he got hurt, although the numbers weren't great for him. He just seems like somebody who Doc is going to lean on based on what Doc was saying in the interview during the game. So it just seems like Marjon really fumbled an opportunity to really show off what he has learned and show that he has better decision making, so on and so forth. Just not a good look for Marjon throughout the summer league.
Yeah, and as we start to get closer to the season and start to take a stab at the rotation and what minutes could look like, that will probably open the door for a larger Marjon discussion. But we'll leave it at that. Impressed with what you saw from Chris Livingston and A.J. Johnson throughout the course of Summer League, and some more work to be done for Marjon Beauchamp. Leave your thoughts in the comments as well. Where do the Bucks rank? Where would you place them in the Eastern Conference? Are they the team most likely to push the Boston Celtics, or was this just a full-on homer episode that we put out there? So we'll wait to hear your thoughts on that one. We'll be back once again with a show tomorrow. And as I mentioned, we're starting to inch closer and closer to the NBA schedule starting to drop. So very curious to see the marquee matchups that the Bucks would have. If this is yet another year where we see the Bucks on Christmas Day, do they get to host a game for the first time in a non-quasi-COVID year as well? So we'll get into all of that coming up throughout the course of the week, and as we get closer and closer to the season starting here on Locked On Bucks. For Camille, I'm Justin. We'll talk to you once again tomorrow on Locked On Bucks.